Welcome to Around the ECHL, brought to you by TRU by Hilton every Wednesday. And we're honored to have with us today the longtime voice of the Kansas City Mavericks, Bob Rennison. We'll talk to Bob about the rivalry, a lot of great matchups, even in the postseason over the years, and a couple players now calling Kansas City home. Jesse Mitchin, who has played in 20 games this year for Kansas City, and most recently signed Garrett Clark, who was here back in 14-15, and then, of course, was here very briefly in 18-19. All coming up on Around the ECHL, brought to you by TRU by Hilton. Welcome to Around the ECHL, brought to you every Wednesday by our friends at TRU by Hilton. The visiting teams come to town. They stay at TRU by Hilton, one of the best hotels in the Metroplex. And joining us is the voice of the Kansas City Mavericks for the last 13 years, a good friend and a great broadcaster. He's been around the world and back, the one and only Bob Rennison. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How about you, Tommy?
I'm doing great. You know, obviously it's been a challenging year again. Some games canceled because of, COVID situation and the pandemic world we're living in, and not traveling, calling the games from remote locations. So it's been a different year, but you know what? I'm thankful that I have a job and that I'm calling games and doing what I love to do. So dealing with what everybody's dealing with these days, no complaints. How about you?
Oh my gosh. As you say, the remote broadcasts are very difficult. I'm so thankful that I get to sit in the gondola at the home games. In fact, I'm doing that this evening. Is this being recorded for today or tomorrow?
It's as we record here on Tuesday, it will air on Wednesday.
Okay, so last night I was in the gondola and got to call the Mavericks game against the Wichita Thunder. And you were telling me about coming up in the near future, there will be quite a stretch of games between the Mavericks and the Allen Americans. Well, the game last night between the Mavericks and the Wichita Thunder, that was the fifth time in 6 Mavericks games that they took on Wichita. And I believe for Wichita, it was 5 consecutive games against the Mavericks. Of course, that due in part to the game that was postponed when the Allen Americans were to be in Independence last week. But that game, as we've alluded to, rescheduled.
Yeah, and we can announce it now officially. The game will now be on the 16th of February. That means we'll play back-to-back in KC on the 15th, which is a Tuesday, and then the 16th on a Wednesday, and then we'll go to Wichita on Friday. So it turns into a 3-game road trip, but it also is 5 straight against Kansas City because we play the Mavericks the week before in Allen on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that's a lot. That's basically it's a mini playoff series, Bob, and things tend to get a little bit tight, dicey,
Yes,
and a little bit aggressive when you play a team that many times in a row. So I'm looking forward to see how it all transpires.
Oh my gosh. And that's the same thing that Tad O'Head, head coach of the Mavericks, was talking about, not necessarily because the Mavericks and Tulsa play back to back to back so many times, but it's a 7-game season between those two teams. And Tulsa won the first 3, and Tad was alluding to it being like a playoff series, saying, hey, the Mavericks can still win this thing. And what do you know, after the first 3 games, which the Oilers won, the Mavericks have won the next 2. But it is a lot of fun seeing, as the Mavericks will against Allen coming up and the Mavericks against the Wichita Thunder. It is fun seeing the same team over and over again because the rivalries just intensify when that happens.
Well, it's already heated because Jesse Mitchin is there. He went to Kansas City, didn't come back to Allen. A lot of fans weren't happy about that. And now, as of last week, Garrett Clark is now a member of the Kansas City Mavericks. Anybody, knows the history of Garrett Clark. He's one of those guys. He's very intense. He usually is one of your penalty minute leaders during the season, and that'll make this, especially this 5-game set coming up in February, pretty interesting. But looking forward to seeing Clarky here this weekend.
And he is yet to play his first game for the Mavericks, unless that happened last night in the game against the Wichita Thunder. the fans have been talking about his penalty minutes and how they continue to accumulate. The Mavericks already have the leading penalty minute guy in the league, and Mikhail Robidoux, and Laurent Ouellette has got a lot of penalty minutes. So the Mavericks looking a bit different than teams in the past. It's not that they haven't had a lot of guys with penalty minutes, but it's just so much more than in years gone by. And that started from the very first home game against the Iowa Heartlanders when several penalty minutes were called. And I talked with David Fine, voice of the Iowa Heartlanders. Great to have David in the conference where we get to see him quite a bit. Great guy, but he talked about how that kind of skewed the number of PIMs that the Iowa Heartlanders have this season.
Well, I think about a guy that played for Kansas City back in the day, Colt King. Mm-hmm. And I think that Colt King and Garrett Clark had a little run in at one time, did they not?
Garrett Clark, yes. And there was also, I believe it was Garrett Grinke, who with 30 seconds to go in the game, Colt King KO'd this guy as they were skating up the ice. And Colt King ended up getting a 7-game suspension out of that. There was a photograph that was turned in, and right after it was turned in, Colt King talked to the photographer and said, please don't let anyone see that. But he was just a few seconds too late, and he ended up getting a 7-game suspension.
Get sunshine for the whole squad at Tropical Smoothie Cafe.
So the Mavericks this season, much like the Americans, started out very slow. They've come around of late. They're won 8 of their last 10. They had a 5-game winning streak until the other night. They're playing better hockey. How are things going in Kansas City?
Mavericks about the same way. They started out very slow this season, and all of a sudden they've been playing very well. One thing that's kind of a myth, not a myth, but a mystery, is that the Mavericks have a hard time defeating one of the teams with the worst record in the league, the Iowa Heartlanders. But you throw in the games against Wichita, and the Mavericks have been playing very well. And then on Sunday in Tulsa, Kansas City put it together for a 6-1 triumph over the Tulsa Oilers. And at one part of that game, the Mavericks had a 3-0 lead. The Oilers came right back. Then Tulsa went into a 4-on-4 situation in which the Mavericks connected for that, and there was no looking back from that time. And there was one player, as things are this year, with so many players having to come in for a game or two due to situations with COVID and with injuries. But there's a young man who lives actually in the Dallas area who drove up to play that one game. His name is Zane Schartz, and he actually played club level hockey in college, but he got the 6th goal of the game that night in that 6-1 triumph over the Tulsa Oilers. And Tulsa is a place where the Mavericks have stumbled over the years more than maybe any other place in the league.
This is Bob Rennison, the voice of the Kansas City Mavericks. 2 players, Bob, over 30 points. Pastor Jeb with 34, and Derek Angeli, a guy I've always liked. I thought solid player. I know his dad usually comes to the games in Allen when they play here. 2 players over 30 points. Obviously, you guys have had the offense this year. What is, if you would say, what has been the one downfall for the team?
The one downfall would be the power play. The Mavericks have struggled a great deal in man advantage situations. Penalty kill has been pretty good, but for whatever reason, they just haven't been able to put the biscuit in the basket on the power play. Not that they haven't played well. There have been times where a recent game against the Wichita Thunder in 2 consecutive power plays, they had 7 shots on goal, quality opportunities. That seems to be when they run into the hottest goaltending that they see. A goaltender who played his first 2 games for Wichita was brilliant during the Mavericks power play. A guy named Olivier Rodrigue, who played in his first 2 games in the ECHL, and he turned in a superb performance for the Tulsa Oilers, but they just can't seem to get it done in man advantage situations.
Below Zero Cryo, whole body cryotherapy stimulates the body's natural healing abilities through exposure to extreme cold. Cryotherapy was developed in Japan in 1978 as a treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. Over the past 3 decades, it's become even more popular as its performance-enhancing and general health and wellness benefits have become more well-known. Call Below Zero Cryo for an appointment today. 469-362-8191. Below Zero Cryo is located at 8715 Lebanon Road, Suite 400 in Frisco. Jesse Mitchell's only played in 20 games this year. Obviously, he's out and injured. What's his story?
Fans love him. He, during that first home game against the Iowa Heartlanders, when everyone was excited about everyone dropping the gloves, and he kind of put on a show for the fans after he received a 5-minute penalty and then was sent to the dressing room. And he just kind of raised his arms, skated in a big circle. And he told me later that fans, he wants to give them what they want to see. And that's exactly what he did.
He is much like Daryl Bootlin. He's a show performer. He likes to play up to the crowd. Bootlin did the same thing when he played here, in Allen a few years ago. Always had the crowd raising his arms up, trying to get everybody fired up. That's Jesse Mitchell's game. He was popular here last year. Unfortunately, injury cut his season short again. Hey, Bob, before we close here, I wanted to talk about a guy that you and I knew very, very well, who we lost after Christmas, and that's Jim Wiley. Always loved when Jim came to the building. Great stories. I always made time for Jim. I didn't matter how far behind I was on getting ready for a broadcast. If Wiley's in the press box holding that coffee, sipping on coffee, I'm there talking to him, getting the great stories. Give us, your thoughts on Jim Wiley and the man that we knew is a great leader in our former CHL.
Jim Wiley, he actually coached the Kansas City Blades for a short time and was an interim coach with the Sharks as well. But I loved visiting with Jim, and he always had time for me to visit with me. And he played in the old CHL, the CHL that preceded the CHL that the Mavericks and Allen Americans were in. And any subject, he would talk on it. And he talked to me about the time he played in Tulsa back in those old days and how nice the fans were. And one particular incident I remember about Jim Wiley, not an incident, but a situation. You recall, of course, in season 4 of the Mavericks and the Americans, when the two met in a playoff series, and the game went into double overtime, and a lot of Mavericks were upset because the Americans had a couple of 5-on-3 power plays, and Jim was in Independence, and it was warm outside. A lot of the fans were tailgating, and Jim said to me, "Hey, let's go on outside and visit with the fans." And there's one particular fan who got angered a lot over calls by the officials, and we ran into her, and Jim took time, very calm demeanor, as he always had, and he explained why the officials made those calls, and she was happy with that explanation from Jim. He just had that way about him. And his wife, Chris, I remember her from the time he coached the Kansas City Blades, and she loved to talk about Jim's son, who pitched in, I believe it was the Yankees organization. And she was talking about when Michael Jordan played minor league baseball. And she said, "No, wait a minute. That's great for the game, but there's someone that could be on that team who's worked their way up through the ranks of baseball, but they're not on that team." So she was looking out for the people who work hard to get to where they are. But also with Jim Wiley, anytime I needed any information, I could call him up, and there he was. And he took his time to think about the answers before answering.
Bob, I can't thank you enough for doing this. We appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in February. And, best of luck to you guys. And I haven't seen you since the New Year switch. So Happy New Year and continued good health.
Happy New Year to you, Tommy. Always great visiting with you. And thanks for having me on the program.
This is found around the ECHL every Wednesday here on the American Social Media Network.
Hello, Americans fans. Former American defenseman Nolan Dakota here with a message from Fast Signs in Plano. Both Plano locations are independently owned and operated by myself and are proud partners with the Americans for this season and the Americans Drive for Five. At Fast Signs, we understand the burden this difficult time presents on businesses, and helping you to solve your changing visual communication and business challenges is our commitment. Mention this ad when you call Fast Signs in Plano for 10% off your next order. Fast Signs, more than fast, more than signs.